Section 6. Deconstructing the embodiment/ownership of the self. When it comes to deconstructing the embodiment and ownership of the self, Susan Blackmore takes the extreme position of flatly denying that she has any self at all. She starts her argument by identifying two extreme positions, which, she claims, people commonly adopt when attempting to analyze the self. The first is to see the self as a psychological point at the center of one's consciousness. She asks people to think about, quote, the real you, the inner self, that bit of yourself that really feels those heartfelt emotions, the bit of you that once or many times fell in love, the you that is conscious and that cares, thinks, works hard, believes, dreams, and imagines. I mean, who you really are. Unless you have thought about this a good deal, you probably jump to the conclusion about yourself that it has some kind of continuity and persists through your life, that it is the center of your consciousness, has memories, holds beliefs, and makes the important decisions of your life, end quote. The opposite extreme, which has arisen in modern time when many people have ceased to believe in the existence of a separable and immortal soul, is, says Blackmore, quote, to identify the self with the whole brain or whole body, end quote. After all, when you talk about another person, you mean them, the whole body, the entire person. So why not see yourself in the same way? The problem is that we really do see the self as something different from our brains and bodies. Blackmore says, quote, it feels as though there is someone inside who is consciously making the decisions. You can point to your body and say, that is me, but do you really mean it? We think of ourselves as something separate from our brains and bodies. This is what needs explaining, end quote. Blackmore concludes that A, yourself is probably reducible to your personality and your memories, and that B, neither of these is separable from your brain and body, quote. Personality is a fairly consistent way of behaving that makes one person identifiably different from another. This way of behaving reflects the kind of brain we were born with and our lifetime's experiences, end quote. And she adds that, quote, in an important sense, you are your memories and personality. At least you would not be the same person without them. But they are not things or properties of a separate self. They are complex functions of neural organization, end quote. Blackmore then surveys theories of the self. At the most reductive extreme, she quotes Francis Crick's dismissive comment that you're nothing but a pack of neurons. But she questions this on two grounds. First, we don't feel like a pack of neurons. And an ultra-reductive theory like this needs to explain, quote, how a pack of neurons comes to believe that it is actually an independent conscious self, end quote. Second, which neurons underpin the self? It can't be all of them, because the vast majority of neurons are engaged in unconscious activities of which the self is totally unaware. Blackmore concedes that our intentions may, quote, depend completely on the neurons, just as the computation depends completely on the chips in the computer. But to understand them, we must work in an appropriate level of explanation, end quote. And she insists the behavior of neurons is not the right level. Blackmore ends up contrasting two major kinds of theory of the self, quote. On the one hand are what we might call real self theories. They treat the self as a persistent entity that lasts a lifetime, is separate from the brain and from the world around, has memories and beliefs, initiates actions, experiences the world, and makes decisions. On the other hand, she says, are what we might call illusory self theories. They liken the self to a bundle of thoughts, sensations, and experiences tied together by a common history. For example, the work of David Hume, Derek Parfit, and Galen Strawson, who liken the self to, quote, a series of pearls on a string, end quote. According to these theories, Blackmore says, quote, the illusion of continuity and separateness is provided by a story the brain tells or a fantasy it weaves, end quote. Blackmore comments that, quote, everyday experience, ordinary speech, and common sense are all in favor of the real self, while logic and evidence and more disciplined experience are on the side of the illusory self. I prefer logic and evidence, and therefore prefer to accept some version of the idea that the continuous, persistent, and autonomous self is an illusion, end quote. And writing a book, when the word I appears in this book, it is a convention that both you and I understand, but it does not refer to a persistent conscious inner being behind the words, end quote.